and welcome to my YouTube channel and blog. I'm Jenny Hall. Today we are going to be having another card making tutorial using Meditarranean Moments stamp set and the MISTI stamp positioning tool. Meditarranean Moments stamp set is going to be released in the 2017 Occasions catalog from Stampin Up. So this is a little bit of an advanced look at a product that you will be able to purchase right after the beginning of the new year. I'm going to be using stitched framelits and circle dies to get some extra circle action happening on the front of the card. And to do the stamping today, I will be using the MISTI stamp positioner tool. If you haven't used the MISTI before, then I would like you to be able to get an idea of what the MISTI can do for you. You can use it to just get a good, nice, straight stamp onto a cardstock, or you can use it in the way that I'm using it to do stamp positioning, to be able to go over the stamp many times without having to remove your cardstock, and it gives you a different kind of a look. So when I'm stamping on this piece of blue paper that's already been cut by a stitched framelit, I want to be able to isolate an area on a stamp and just stamp one little spot on a larger stamp. This is possible by using the MISTI stamping tool and my Stampin Up markers. You could use whatever kind of markers you choose, but the Stampin Up markers are a nice dye ink, and it allows me to go onto the cardstock tone on tone and match perfectly. The cardstock is Pacific Point cardstock, and my marker is also Pacific Point ink, so it's going to match perfectly. By using the stamping tool, I am able to get it exactly in an area, and then I can keep re-stamping until I get the image to look the way that I want it to look. Sometimes when you use a rubber stamp or a photopolymer stamp, it doesn't get you a look that like maybe you missed a spot with the ink pad, or maybe for some reason the block was tilted one direction or another direction when you do your stamping. This is all part of everyday crafting. What the MISTI does is lets you have a do-over. So as long as you want to try to just really darken up something, then the MISTI lets you stamp over your image as many times as you need. So in order to do the next image, I'm going to be going on to watercolor paper. And watercolor paper, as you know, is thicker and has more texture than general cardstock. So I know that I will need to probably stamp a couple of times to get a really good image. So instead of just taking a standard, stamp everything black and put it down, I'm going to do some color isolation on a larger image. So what I'm able to do is to take the marker and color in just the chair part of the image, and then it will allow me to only stamp down the chair. So I'm going to be able to do some watercoloring. I love to watercolor, and when I have a tool that allows me to make my watercoloring a little easier and give me especially more precision, then I think it's just the coolest thing in the world. So as I'm using my marker, I'm going to color in as much of the chair image as I can, and then I am closing the door on the MISTI to take the ink to the paper. This is now where I can use my water brush, and if I just touch the edge of the stamped lines or the outline of the stamp, then I got enough ink to be able to move around. And I use a tissue to get off the extra ink that's on my water brush. And you can use a paintbrush for this. I just grab a water brush because it's usually the easiest thing for me to use. I have several paintbrushes that I need to get. They need to get some ink onto them and get some love, some inky love. So here is the chair kind of coming up to life a little bit, And you can see that the chair is not complete because there should be a cat sitting on the seat of the chair. And we're going to get to the cat next. He's going to get his little stamped image next. But in this way, I'm able to use the markers and get the image isolated. And I can do this and switch colors. The only stipulation that I find giving myself in this process is that I really need to make sure that I clean and dry between every application. It's not 100% necessary, and I have seen other card makers not clean in between, because the chair is, as the door to the MISTI closes, the chair is going to probably pick up a little bit more of that blue ink, and that's okay. And it's not going to go anywhere else because it is on the MISTI. So I just make sure that I don't want to blur anything. And I guess it's the mom in me coming out trying to get everything cleaned up. So here's little kitty, and little kitty is in smoky slate and basic gray. The chair was in Pacific Point. And what I did for the cat was I started out with the lighter of the two grays, which is smoky slate. I stamped him down, and then I smoothed out with the water brush, and then came back on to crisp up the lines, the outlining for the cat, and also to lend a little bit of shading, because that's when you can use the darker of the two shades and lend a little bit more depth to the image. I have also went ahead and stamped the greenery that's inside the flower pot, and the greenery was stamped with wild wasabi and garden green. The garden green, I just went in and filled in a little bit of the color just to give a bit of variance. The flower pot itself is stamped in rich razzleberry, so I did the outline. Then I went back in with a water brush and did the filling in. And I also wanted to get a little bit more ink than what I had going on. So instead of bringing out the ink pad and dabbing up some of the color from the lid of my ink pad, I used the tip and did the tip-to-tip process. This is close to the final part of coloring the image, and I am using Sahara sand and soft suede. I started off with Sahara sand so that I would smooth everything out and fill in the cobblestone images with a lighter of the two browns. And then I used the soft suede to go after and give some definition to the floor part of the image. That also allows me to be able to bring the color out tip to tip and kind of expand what the color base is for the floor. The floor is a kind of a tricky area when you're working with painting, because you don't want to have the whole area be exactly the same color. You want to choose to either go the foreground darker or the foreground lighter, but you don't want to have all of it the same tone. But every crafter has their preference, and I suggest that you follow whatever rule you find yourself more comfortable with. I'm using the Tempting Turquoise to go and give a little more definition to the chair, and then I used Garden Green to give a little more definition to the greenery that is in the flower pot. And here you see the image is finished. Here's that same circle die, and this is a standard circle die, not a stitched framelit. And I'm using it on the Big Shot to cut it out. And the reason that I used it to measure in the beginning is, as you can see, there's plenty of room on the paper. Sometimes I find that I don't leave myself enough room on a piece of cardstock, because when I'm putting an image down, I might get too close to the edge. And if I know I'm working within a certain size circle, I want to try to take the extra step to measure it and make sure that I'm able to leave enough room. Here is the Designer Series paper, Blooms and Bliss. And I chose this paper because it kind of complemented the Pacific Point blue. And it is a piece of paper that has a lot of depth to the image. It's kind of a loose flower. It kind of reminds me of lavender, which reminds me of the Mediterranean. So when it all kind of came together in my mind in this respect. And I'm adhering it to a piece of standard white cardstock. I'm bringing that section up away from the card base to give a little bit of depth to the card image. The watercolor paper is also going to be raised on adhesive foam dimensionals away from the stitched framelit that is on Pacific Point. Pacific Point's a nice blue color, and it reminds me of the Mediterranean. So here is a color combination that I might not have chosen, and it really doesn't do a whole lot for me, other than I think that everything is tied together in the focal painted image. I did use the color of the cardstock, I did use the color of the pattern paper, and bring it all together in one circle of color. So that way I'm able to tie the design together. These are perfect white accents. They're an enamel accent that has a self-adhesive back, and I'm putting those down in various places of the card to move the eye around. This is a card base that is measuring 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 once it is scored and folded. Thank you for joining me for another card making tutorial. I invite you to go over to my blog at jennystampsup.com to get more card making inspiration. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.